Hello, everybody. It's nice to have you here for another live stream again. My name is Natalia Hansen, and I am part of the Humane Canada Summit for Animals team. Let me tell you real quickly what the Summit for Animals is and why we are doing these live streams. So, the Summit for Animals is Canada's best and boldest animal welfare conference. We host it once a year in a different Canadian city. And this year, we're going to the beautiful and vibrant city of Montreal in Quebec. It's happening on April 27th, 28th, and 29th. And guess what? The conference is 90% sold out. So, if you want to come and network with the largest delegation of animal welfare, sheltering, and advocacy professionals, this is your chance. Don't wait until we sell out and say, yaks, I should have done it. No, take action now. It's now or never. It's an investment in your professional future. You'll get networking, you'll get learning, you'll expand your thinking, you will learn the latest trends in animal welfare, sheltering, and advocacy. So the website is here on the screen. It's humanecanada.ca/summit, and we will see you in Montreal. So, we are doing a series of live streams with some of our speakers so you can get to know them ahead of the conference and you can get an idea of what kind of sessions and what kind of speakers you are going to meet in Montreal at the Summit for Animals. So far, we've done live streams talking about fundraising, we've talked about animal sheltering, we've talked about dog behavior, marketing, but I'm excited about today's because we are going to talk about farmed animal welfare in Canada and specifically the role that corporations and the private sector plays in advancing animal welfare in Canada. So, just one second. Okay, sorry about that. So, I have a guest waiting in the wings, and I'm going to tell you about Darren first before he comes out. So, Darren Vanstone is a dynamic leader in sustainable sourcing, driving impactful policies and partnerships across industries. He's the managing director of Ocatra, a global network of sustainability experts. He helps businesses from multinational corporations to grassroots organizations turn sustainability commitments into action. With a client portfolio spanning human and pet food, retail, manufacturing, apparel, and alternative proteins, Darren is at the forefront of shaping ethical, responsible supply chains worldwide. And this is not his first time speaking at the Summit for Animals. Hi, Darren, coming out.
Hey Natalia, how you doing? Thanks for having me. Wow,
Of
I can't live
course.
up to that bio, so thank you so much. I'm just gonna leave.
Of course. It's always interesting when somebody else reads out our bio and we think like, oh wow, is that me? Am I that? Have I accomplished all of that? Do you feel like that?
No, I haven't. I'm just kidding. Yes, great to have you. Great to be here. Very excited to come to the summit. I haven't been to the summit since it's been a while. The great super spreader in Banff, I think, was the last one I was at.
Yes, we have pictures of you in Banff. I think that was the last time I saw you. And as I
Yeah.
said before when I was reading out your bio, this is not your first time speaking at the Summit for Animals.
No, it's funny. This feels like I feel like April for me is gonna be old home week. So at the beginning of April, I'm actually going to speak to the American Association of Poultry Vets, and that will include other speakers from about the same that I was actually on a panel with, I think in 2016 at the Humane Canada Summit. So
No way.
back when it was in Toronto. So I think with
Yes.
Dr. Mike Van Masso, Jackie Weprick from NFAC and
Yeah.
somebody from A&W. So yeah, I think I feel like I'm just it's my home school. It's my like high school reunion in April for sure. So excited to be back.
That is so cool to hear that you're going to meet up with them after your panel in Toronto back in 2016. That was my first Humane Canada conference, and I
Oh,
remember,
really?
yeah, I met you there. Yeah, that's so cool. Awesome. Well, let's get started. And by the way, if anybody's watching this live, we're live on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I encourage you to post your questions, to post your comments. People are welcoming you here on LinkedIn, saying, welcome, Darren. Because the goal of these live streams is for you, the viewers, to interact with the speakers. And like I said at the beginning, get a sneak peek into their sessions. So we're going to be talking about sustainability. We're going to be talking about food. We're going to talk about farmed animal welfare in Canada. And you're part of four panelists. So I know that maybe each one of you is going to cover a particular subject. Your co panelists are from animal justice. We have Mercy for Animals, and we have yourself. So please feel free to touch on anything that you're particularly familiar with,
Yeah.
and anything else will be a surprise for people who come to the conference and get to hear from you four.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
yeah.
why don't we start by you telling us how have food industry leaders successfully integrated animal welfare improvements into their supply chains, and what challenges have they faced in doing so?
Yeah, so I think ultimately what we see is a lot of food where food companies have been really successful, I think, is really engaging with their broader supply chain, with other companies, with their peer companies, and with other parts of the value chain, right? So I think we have a couple of different parts of it, and I think the NGO side, and I think what the animal welfare and animal rights folks that you've spoken about will talk about is sort of the push towards commitment, right? And so there will be public campaigns and corporate campaigns to move companies to make commitments, and I think for me, success is really about then how do we change that into implementation, right? So what do we do to move that forward? And I think where we see companies be the most successful is when they engage with a broad set of stakeholders. So companies need to set policies and ambitions, which really sort of communicate their expectations and their ambitions in the long term. Those policies tend to reflect their own values, but also their corporate values, but also the values of their consumers, customers, and sort of other relevant stakeholders. And then and those will be sort of longer term, right? So it's a process that they follow. But I think ultimately where they really are successful is when they can engage with a broader set of stakeholders. I think right now, the push to commitment involves a bunch of stakeholders to get them there, but there's just that support. So everything after the commitment, I think, is really what once if that's the trick. That's how you manage it, right? You engage with your internal stakeholders, you do all the work. So to me, it's really about having that support, having that relationship with your supply chain, with your producers, with processors, with industry groups.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like there are a couple of stakeholders. For example, you mentioned NGOs, you mentioned
Mhm.
consumers, us, the people who are purchasing, we have the purchasing powers. So, what role do these stakeholders like NGOs, consultants, and consumer advocates play in influencing corporate commitments to farmed animal welfare?
Yeah, okay, so I'll start with myself because I have a fairly simple role in this. I am not as a consultant, I don't influence people to make commitments or that sort of on the NGO and the companies themselves. So they really take care of that. My role is just to help them organize their thoughts into a process that they can use to get through to implementation, right? So I think that that's sort of where it is. I think ultimately we see NGOs both driving and reflecting consumer um, interest and expectations on the issue, right? So they will do things through campaigning and through engagement to align the values up to say this is sort of where we think we're going to be in a few years. Um, and then, so I think consumers have an opportunity to support through purchasing and through supporting those companies that make the decisions to do that, to make like that actually set policies and commitments and move towards it. Um, I think also it's really important that the investors, if you're a publicly traded company, they're going to have a say on what it is that it, right? As the owner of your companies, they're going to have input into it. So I think there's a variety of roles. I think from the NGO side, obviously driving that campaigning is great, but I think there's a real opportunity, especially right now in Canada. I think there's a lot of people wanting to do a lot of companies wanting to do a lot of things. I think there's just an opportunity to provide a bit of support to help them get there.
Okay, yeah, supporting them. And that's why, for example, some of your co-panelists, we have animal justice, we have compassion in world farming, mercy for animals. Those three organizations are very well known for driving people really towards influencing perhaps the decisions and the way that corporations are leading making decisions in improving, in this case, the welfare of farm animals, right? So
Hmm.
mobilizing the audience, right? Whether it's through signing petitions, for example, or public education. So I feel like perhaps that's their role specifically. Okay, yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's how I perceive
Yeah,
these three organizations in particular, and no
yeah,
doubt they do have a say in the outcomes that we see through corporations or the private sector.
yeah. I mean, I think NGOs, um, I can't really think of any other business where people are giving you money to influence them, which is, I think, a really interesting way to think about NGOs, right? Which is great. And I think in that because of that, you are not only reflecting the current ambitions, but you're help sort of shaping the future ambitions for consumers and customers, right? So I think that that's a really great role. And then yeah, I think especially in Canada right now, given the complexity of sort of the supply management system, which I'm sure nobody else wants to talk about right now, but I think there just is a need for NGOs to, beyond accountability, the question is,
Mm,
how do we get there, right? I mean, the accountability point is great, but ultimately, are we having the impact that we actually want to have? Are they able to, are the companies able to implement their commitments? Like, what's stopping them from doing it? What are those challenges?
yeah, okay, interesting. And one thing that I think it's interesting to mention too is when we refer to animals used for meat, for dairy, for egg, we say farmed animals as opposed to farm, right? Because they're being
Hmm.
farmed for
Hmm.
meat, dairy, eggs, as some examples. So, how do you think corporate responsibility programs impact the purchasing decisions in the meat, dairy, and egg industries? And what trends do you see emerging in Canada?
Yeah, so I don't do as much Canadian work as I used to, so I do a lot of work outside of Canada right now. So I think I'll leave that part for my other panelists to talk about sort of what trends they're seeing. Um, so I think again, the if you have a policy that reflects your corporate values and that policy has broad longer term ambitions, like we want to ensure that animals in our supply chain experience this type of life or this quality of welfare or these outcomes, and then you have commitments that move forward towards that. I think that if that's built into their responsible sourcing strategy and the way they do business, so that would include um, building it into their marketing, their communications to their investor relations, and that broader teams inside the organizations. So ultimately, it will drive the way that they purchase, to the extent that the product is available in the marketplace, right? So in some countries, in some cases, those supply chains are really short and really easy to manage. So when you think about something like the UK for a grocer like Marks and Spencer, they have a very short, very compact supply chain that they can influence directly. In
Mm.
places like Canada, it's a bit more complex, and it really is. So the responsible sourcing policies set the strategies and what you want to do and how you want to do it. It's just about we just need to ensure that the product is available for them to purchase.
Okay, got it. And look, I'm gonna get out of the script or the suggested
Okay.
questions we had a little bit because you were just saying you aren't doing a lot of work in Canada right now, but you work with other countries. You just told me you were in Brazil. So can
Hmm.
you give us a sneak peek as to what's happening in other parts of the world when it comes to
Yeah.
corporations and their policies and the supply chain that involves and impacts farm animals?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think obviously different. that sort of um, regionally people the supply chains are different, but there's still sort of they're consistent but a little bit different. You know, the distance a food company is from its producer, not in terms of number of steps and what they can see and the traceability, their oversight on their supply chain really varies. So yeah, so throughout my life, I've been involved with things like the Global Coalition for Animal Welfare, which is, I think there are up to 17 global organizations right now that are attempting to set sort of the global expectations for what animal welfare means to the food industry. And that includes people from Tyson and Maple Leaf Foods, um, and then through to Aramark, Compass Group, all the way through to end users like IKEA, Unilever, Nestle, and Tesco,
Yeah.
right? So it's a pretty broad set. Um, in Brazil right now, one of the processes I'm working on, I'm advisor to COBEA, which is their animal welfare collaborative initiative, and it includes, I think they're up to 8 members right now. And I think what's really interesting about that is that includes really large players like JBS, and Montequeiro, which is the largest egg producer in Brazil, but also smaller ones, smaller producers like Plan Alto Ovos, which is a free range producer, but also IMC, which is International Meal Corp, the franchise holder for Pizza Hut and KFC, and also we have recognized the importance of bringing other industries in because ultimately the entire carcass of an animal doesn't go into just the food chain, right? It goes into other places. And that's sort of why I do work with apparel and with pet food and all those sorts of things. It's really about balancing it, ensuring that all the extra costs, that the expectations are the same across these people means that it sets really good direction for the companies. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so and that's Corbea, and so they just launched, I think, about 8 months ago, 6 months ago, and so yeah, so I think this really broad um, collaborative initiatives is a really interesting thing going on where corporations, food companies recognize they can't do it themselves, and that
Hmm.
ultimately that this sort of working with others is really going to help them get there.
Wow. What I'm hearing is there are a lot of players involved. It's not just one
Mhm.
company, it's not just one person. There are organizations, there are corporations, there are investors. It's a mix. That's great.
Yeah.
Kathy Duncan, my colleague at Humane Canada, says here on LinkedIn, she's watching live. She says, this is going to be such an informative session, and it is so important to have these conversations. And I agree. I agree because I
Yeah.
think, in a very utopic world, okay, maybe we wouldn't use animals for consumption, but we have to remember and be aware that that's what's happening right now. So, how can we then just improve their lives if that's what the reality is? I feel like maybe
Mhm.
maybe that's something that we can consider as a switch in our perspective of, okay, if this is happening, then is there any way that we can improve their lives and the way in which they are processed for human consumption? And even what you said, it's not just meant for human consumption. Sometimes apparel is involved, pet food as
Mhm.
well, which I know you've worked with pet food retailers as well. And I think it's important as well to remember that the change is not going to happen overnight. I think if we look back, and you and your co-panelists will know way more about this, but I'm sure if we look back to 20, 50, 100 years ago, we have improved significantly, right? I'm pretty sure there have been improvements,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
takes time. So the change needs to be incremental. And I want to ask you, what strategies have proven most effective in fostering incremental change toward more humane food production practices?
Yeah. So I think the sort of process that I mentioned at the top, that setting expectations through policy and then sort of managing those through commitments to get you there in the long term really tends to be the way that um, people that the companies have been successful. I think it really is about understanding and managing your supply chain. And I think engaging with them, right? I think it's complex for companies. It's There are two options, right? So you can either stay in the conventional commodity market, which is when you buy chicken, or at this point, your only other option is to go out of that and look into it like a certified type of production system. So it's really hard to manage that commodity market, especially as an individual company. So that's much larger change, right? Because you just buy chicken, you buy it off a market, you don't necessarily always know exactly where it's coming from. There's a lot of things associated with that. So in my mind, where you are successful is when you put that process in place, you engage across just as companies do with all their other sustainability issues, right? So when we're talking about the quality of life and economic well-being of people, of workers and communities, we do the same things, right? We want to know who's impacted and who's doing the impact. We want to understand how we're assessing costs and benefits and who's getting which. Um, but that, yeah, but I think what I think in your summary of what I said last time, it's really those relationships between the two, right? It really is that. It's the relationships between the people that will drive the change. And the more relationships
Okay.
between the stakeholders that you can drive, the more you're going to actually have success.
Yeah. And look, I'm going to do a shameless pitch here for the Summit for Animals because that's
Do
what we
it.
do. We bring people together, we bring sectors together. I remember in 2016, which was my first Humane Canada conference when I met you, we had people from the fur farming industry. And I'm not going to
Yeah.
lie, my first thought was like, what are they doing here? They shouldn't be here. They need to go away.
Yeah.
Honestly, I thought that because I saw them as the enemy, right? The evil people. But we need to bring them into the conversation because that's how we see change. That's how we enact change, as uncomfortable as that may be. So we have people this year. You were talking about Jackie, who presented with you in 2016. She's from NFAC, the
Hmm.
National Farm Animal Coalition.
Care
I said
Care
that right?
Council. National
Council,
Farm
Care
Animal
Council.
Care Council. Yeah.
That's right. National Farm Animal Care Council. She's coming again this year at the conference. So we want to bring the sectors together. And we've had at the Summit for Animals, we've had people, representatives from, for example, the egg industry. We've had people from the dairy industry. So yes, that's what we want to do. That's the intention of this conference, to really bring all the voices together and
Hmm.
not just one side of the coin. It really bring them together and say, okay, let's have a conversation, let's sit down to talk. And that is one of the things that we achieve, for example, when we have panels like yours.
Yeah.
I want to highlight a comment here from Jennifer. She's part of the Humane Canada team. I've already had my mind opened to a lot of new ideas just from this introductory session. I can't wait for the summit. Exactly.
Yay.
I agree. And then Kathy here says again, incremental change, in my opinion, is the keystone to making changes in this sector. And I think this incremental change applies not only to what we're talking about, which is farm animals, but so many other aspects, so many other issues, so many other things in animal sheltering, in adoptions, in housing, in many things. Having uncomfortable conversations is a part of life and is so necessary. Yep. And let this be
Yeah.
a lesson for our personal lives as well, not just professionals.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we often do, and a lot of times, even when I'm speaking with companies and with producers, we tend to focus a lot on the edges as opposed to like animal rights people versus people that don't think there should be any sort of
Yeah.
restrictions on animal use, right? So we focus on those folks. The 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 most people, 98% of people is a number I just made up, but are sort of stuck in the middle somewhere, right? And in that, and look, you probably met some of the fur producers, you probably met some of the other sorts of producers. Those are not horrible people looking to do horrible things. So we just need to understand what do they want to do, where are we aligned, and what we can do to help them get there, right? So we need to just understand that. I think ultimately focusing on the edges just means that we're kind of giving up a lot of work that can get done. And I think I understand why we do that, but ultimately, both from the producer side, but also from the NGO side, the question is sort of how do we feel like because I'm older and been through this for 10 years now, I'm sort of at the point where I'm just like, look, what have we done in the last 10 years? When we think about our ambitions, like if the ambition of the animal agriculture communications industry is to sort of slow down, manage, and eliminate the number of NGO campaigns, has that been successful? And then if the NGO side is to try to get these big changes, have we been successful? And probably not as successful as we want to have been. Um, so maybe we just it's a really great time, I think, to reset and think about sort of what we can do, how we can manage this issue as we manage other issues so that we can find ways to work for both.
That's a perfect segue into the last question I'm going to ask you. And you've kind of already answered it, but maybe you will want to add something more. And it's precisely about looking ahead. And what do you think are the key factors in that will determine whether
Yeah.
food companies continue to advance farm animal welfare and what obstacles might slow down progress?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean I think I've mentioned it before. I think that for food companies they want to enter a process which is sort of it's the OECD responsible business process. It's the same way you manage all your other sustainability issues, right? You said there's a diagram, and we can all look at the diagram if we want. So there is a way to do this. Um, so I think that's it. But I think where we're struggling, I think in Canada is on the implementation side. So I think for all of
Mm,
us, it's really just understanding um, how do we work this out so that we can stop having the same conversation over and over and over and over again, right? Like, how do we do this? Because ultimately, I don't think any of us really care about sort of justifying the last 10 years of our work. I think we just want to figure out what we can do to not have to have that conversation, right? I think, this idea of holding people accountable without them having the tools to make it happen is a bit complex. I think the idea from the producer side of just being able to tell their story better and the people don't understand, those two things that we've kind of hung our hats on for the last 10 years aren't really driving the change. So you know, I think it is those multi-stakeholder collaborative initiatives. I think it's addressing the relationships between the industries so that we can come up with new and better ideas and ways forward.
okay, I like it. It's hopeful. It gives me hope to hear this. And I think a lot of times too,
Yay!
we get stuck in thinking of like, oh, this hasn't happened. This isn't happening. This is not going well. But how about we shift our thinking for a little bit and just think, let's think of the progress that it has been made. And again, this applies to farm animal welfare. This applies to animal sheltering. This applies to, for example, shelterings, reducing their euthanasia rates, for instance, more people adopting or sourcing their dogs from responsible breeders, for instance. So I think that helps us. A positive mindset and just remembering the strides that we've made helps us continue pushing forward, because I know a lot of times it's sad and it's depressing and we just get so down and feel like this is never gonna end, the suffering, etc. So let's just focus on what has been done and what we can continue doing. And I can tell
Yeah,
you, Darren, I'm not making this up because this is something that we hear a lot in our post conference surveys. A lot of people tell us they leave the conference feeling hopeful, feeling elevated, in thinking that there is hope, there is change, there's a path forward. And we've come from some tough years after the pandemic. And so people say that it's invigorated their sense of being, really, just by being surrounded by all these like-minded people and giving them a sense of purpose and continue doing their work. So finally, to end this live stream, I mean, loving this conversation. I'm very engaged, but we don't want to give everything away because the best for last, the best for when people come to the conference and sit in and watch your panel and listen to you and your co-panelists. But do you have any closing words for anybody who may be on the fence about coming to the Summit for Animals, knowing that we're 90% sold out?
yeah. Okay, so I'll pitch it for you. Look, I think as I've mentioned before, I think we all try to do this work in isolation, and that is not only hard and painful, but rarely, I mean, you can do lots of stuff, but when you talk about global food systems or global production systems, and Canada's part of that, it really benefits to having a really good uh, team of people around you, and it's the people that you see that you think you agree with, and the people you think you have less to agree with. And I think having all those folks and sort of building those relationships and those networks is really, and I think Humane Canada is a great way to do it, right? And I think, yeah, I think that would be my suggestion, that if you're feeling a little stuck where you are, you know, just understand that you're probably not gonna be able to solve the issue yourself. Great if you can. Thank you so much. Take care of that. I could take a couple weeks off. It'd be amazing. But just recognize that there is value in speaking to engaging with as many different people as possible with as many different insights. And I would be really happy for those super frustrated. I have never been accused of being the person bringing optimism. So now I'm feeling like I'm not going to be able to deliver. But yeah, but please come and say hi if you're there. I'd be happy to have a chat.
Yes, you said it so well. Thank you. Thank you for selling the conference for me, pitching it. I love
Uh,
that.
the
He's
check is
not a
in the
paid
mail.
actor. He's saying this from the heart, honestly. Yeah, so for everybody who's watching this, whether you're watching live right now or you're watching the replay, honestly, come to the conference. It's your once a year chance to really come together with different voices, different perspectives. That's what we've been talking about during this conversation. Challenge your perceptions, open up your mindset, have those uncomfortable conversations, but also have conversations with people who are like you, who think like you, who are in the same sector as you. It's really nice because we have people coming from all corners of Canada, from Northwestern Territories to BC to Quebec to Alberta, PEI, everywhere. And we even have people coming from other countries. This year, we have people coming from the United States, we have people from Australia. So it's really nice to be able to hear how are they doing something in their neck of the woods. And everybody can learn from everybody. The big organizations can learn from the little organizations and vice versa. So again, the Summit for Animals is 90% sold out. It's happening in just over a month, April 27th, 28th, 29th. There's still an opportunity to register. It's humanecanada.ca/summit, SUMMIT. Thank you so much, Darren. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I'm very excited to seeing you again. I haven't seen you since Banff. And yeah, we'll say hi. We'll give each other a warm, nice hug. And
It'll
I
be
look forward
awesome.
to sitting on your panel and learning more from you and from your three co-panelists on this topic of farm animal welfare. Thank you for your time and thank you to everybody who is watching this. Stay safe and we will see you all in April in Montreal. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.